Paul Bunyan and Paul Revere have in common? Other than obviously the name Paul. That's an easy one. Okay. At first glance, you would think, well, not a whole lot. One of them is a pretend giant lumberjack who walks around with his giant blue ox and is so big that the story goes he created 10,000 lakes in Minnesota with his footsteps, and he carved out the Grand Canyon with his giant axe, and there are like giant depictions of him across highways across the United States. That is a guy who never existed, and nobody ever expected anyone to believe that those stories were true. In fact, most historians believe that it's actually not authentic American folklore. It was written intentionally to be children's stories. Nobody believes there was a real person named Paul Bunyan. Now, Paul Revere, on the other hand, Paul Revere, we know, is a real person of history. He was an important figure in the American Revolution. And even though his famous midnight ride is sort of encapsulated in a poem, most historians believe that the poem is mostly accurate and it depicts a real event in real American history. Real person, fake person. Here's what they have in common. Paul Bunyan, Paul Revere, they're both characters that if you grew up in America, you've probably heard of these guys. They're stories that we tell our children because they both illustrate something special about that American character, that frontier spirit, that revolutionary period of time that we're growing more and more distanced from. We're going to start a new series today about Jonah. And Jonah is a character from the Bible that really, you have two very divided camps when you want to talk about Bible scholars. There is a group on one side of people who love the Lord and who support the validity of the Bible, who say Jonah was written as a parable. It was written as a story that was never meant to be taken literally. It was always meant to teach about the Jewish nation and character and God's character and our character. And that these things were always meant like the parable of the prodigal son, like the parable of the Good Samaritan. It's relatable, but it was never meant to be literal. There's another school of thought that says, no, Jonah is meant to be a historical record. And even though the book was written after his life, and even though the book contains some poetic structure and language, it was a poetic version of a real event, just like the poem about Paul Revere. Now, whichever camp you fall in today, here's the good news. Whichever version of that is, the value that we gain and the lessons that we learn from this guy's life are the same. I happen to fall into camp number 2. I believe that the story that we find in the Bible about Jonah is a historical record because Jonah is a real person of history. Okay? Depending on what kind of church you grew up in, or if you've ever seen the VeggieTales video, you may think that Jonah is another guy like, King Arthur or Robin Hood. He's actually a real person. Jonah, son of Amittai, was born in the late 700s BCE. He grew up in a village called Gath-Hepher, which is near Jerusalem, far from Jerusalem. It's near Nazareth, kind of the area where Jesus is from. He's recorded multiple places in the Bible. Jesus references Jonah as if he's a real person. Jonah is recorded in 2 Kings. He was a prophet during the reign of Jeroboam II, so we know that he was functioning as a public figure in Israel between 786 and 784 BCE. Some of you guys who are church veterans, you may recognize the name Elisha. Elisha was a famous prophet in the Old Testament. Jonah is the guy who's the prophet right after Elisha, real person of history. And we learn some really interesting things that go way beyond flannel graph. Any of you guys grow up in a church time when you had flannel graph? I know that's okay. Some of you guys are like, what is flannel graph? Just imagine a big, giant, like chalkboard size felt board, and all of these little felt characters that would stick onto the board. And we would tell the Bible stories with little felt guys. We had the felt whale, and my brother and I would sometimes sneak in and turn everything upside down for the Sunday school. So anything that goes wrong in front of house, it's because we sowed the seeds and we put the felt things upside down. I'm sorry. Okay? But there's so much more to the story, and I want to show you some really interesting takeaways. So let's dive right into chapter 1, verse 1. The Bible records this. It says, the Lord gave this message to Jonah, son of Amittai. Get up. Everybody say, get up. Get up. Hang on to that. You'll need that later. Okay? God says, get up and go to the great city of Nineveh. Announce my judgment against it, because I have seen how wicked its people are. Now, you guys may not spend a lot of time thinking about how wicked Nineveh is. I certainly don't. So let me show you a little bit that history has recorded for us. Nineveh, in that time, when Jonah was alive, Nineveh, it was part of a 3-city sort of metropolis. Imagine Bloomington, Normal, or technically 2 cities, but you kind of lump them into one. Nineveh is part of this deal with 3 cities. They were the capital of the Assyrian Empire, and they were famous in the Bible. And if you look at historical records from other people in the area that wrote about the Assyrians, they were famous for how nasty they were. Okay? Plenty of people took other people's sheep and took other people's territory. The Assyrians were the first ones in Western culture to really take advantage of like war propaganda. So they would do things like they would surround your city, and if you don't surrender immediately, then when they finally sacked the city, they would take all the city leaders and skin them and drape their skins on the walls of the city just to say, this is what happens if you don't give us the city. Who wants to surrender? And not only did they, okay, some of you guys, anybody ever go to Bass Pro Shop? Anybody ever? Bass Pro Shop? Cool place. And you go and they have like the moose head on the wall, and they have the, okay, true story. The kings, the leaders of Assyria, if you would come and be invited to meet with them, if you're a leader from the region, you come meet with them, he's got, oh, this is the king of that. That's his head on my wall. This is the king of that territory. He's on my wall. This is him and his wife and his 2 boys. They're also on my wall. Okay? Nasty, nasty people. Scary people. And they had already begun getting into these border skirmishes with Israel. Israel is like severely outgunned by these people, because Nineveh, in this time, was the largest city in the known world. Okay? Jerusalem was the capital of the nation of originally Israel, and then Judah. Okay? Jerusalem was the biggest city in Israel. Maybe 5,000 people, maybe, in Jerusalem. Nineveh had over 120,000 people living there. So when God says, get up and go to Nineveh and tell them that I'm going to blow up the city because I've seen how wicked they are, right? You need to understand how bad these guys were. Imagine the Sin City reputation of Las Vegas and the crime of the bad part of Chicago and the size of New York City, except it's like in North Korea somewhere where they hate you. Right? It's all of the things that you could possibly roll in. We don't like these guys. And God says, I want you to go there. Get up and go there. Verse 3. So here's how Jonah responds. Verse 3. But Jonah got up and went in the opposite direction to get away from the Lord. He went down. Everybody say down. That's also important. He went down to the port of Joppa, where he found a ship leaving for Tarshish. He bought a ticket and went on board, hoping to escape from the Lord by sailing to Tarshish. Now, remember this, okay, if you're in the historical group like I am, this is history, but it was written much later after the events, and it was written with poetic language, like Paul Revere's Midnight Ride, that we know of mostly from the poem, okay? And because it's written intentionally like that, there are some turns of phrases, some play on words that I want to highlight. And one of those is the word down. As we read all of this passage, I want you to make a mental note of every time you hear the word down. Because verse 1, God says, get up and go to this. And the moment that Jonah starts to turn and go the other direction, we see this word over and over in his life, down. down. In fact, the New Living Translation says he went on board. Literally, the original language says he went down into the ship. Okay, let's read a little more. Verse 4, but the Lord hurled a powerful wind over the sea, causing a violent storm that threatened to break the ship apart. Fearing for their lives, okay, in case you were not sure how strong this storm is, remember, these are professional sailors who do this all the time. They live on the sea all the time. Okay? Because a violent storm, fearing for their lives, the desperate sailors shouted to their gods for help, and they threw the cargo overboard to lighten the ship. But all this time, Jonah was sound asleep. Where? Oh, there it is again. Jonah was sound asleep down in the hold. So the captain went down after him. How can you sleep at a time like this? He shouted. Get up and pray to your God. Maybe he will pay attention to us and spare our lives. Do you see what the writer is doing here? Okay. Again, poetic language. So the crew, verse 7, so the crew cast lots to see which of them had offended the gods and caused a terrible storm. When they did this, the lots identified Jonah as the culprit. Sort of like when you're on family vacation and you're like, one of you four, who was it? This is an enclosed space. How many times do we have to tell you? We can't. It's too cold to roll down the windows. Who was it? Start drawing straws. Whose fault was it? Verse 8. Why has this awful storm come down on us? They demanded. Who are you? What's your line of work? What country are you from? What's your nationality? They're trying to figure out, dude, what did this guy do? I've never seen anything this bad. This is bad. And Jonah answered like the worst possible thing that you could hear if you were a Gentile sailor who's just trying to get to the other side alive. Okay? Whose fault is it? Whose God got so upset they sent the storm? Jonah said, I'm a Hebrew and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land. And the sailors were terrified when they heard this, for he had already told them that he was running away from the Lord. That's a big gulp moment. You're like, oh my, are you kidding me? Facepalm. If they had facepalm emojis in 785 BCE, okay? And here's something I want to show you, right? The moment God says, get up and do what I've asked you to do. Get up and go tell these people that they're going to get destroyed because of their wickedness. And Jonah says, I don't think that I will. I'm going to turn around the other way. And the moment that he does, what we see in his story is the word down, 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 down. Again and again and again. When he turns away from God, his life begins a downward spiral, and it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And the reality is that when you decide, God, I don't think I want to do what you want. I don't think I like your plan for my life. I want to be in charge of my own destiny. I'm going to take matters into my own hands. Jesus, I'm going to take the wheel back from you. When we make that decision, we start our life on a downward spiral. And it's not just us who are moving in that direction. Write this down in your notes. Your sin affects the people around you. Your decision, if you say, I don't need God in my life, I don't want to do that thing, I know he says do this, this, and this, I want to pick parts over here and I want to just ignore this piece. When you choose a path that's in rebellion against God, you send your life on a downward spiral, and your decisions affect the people around you. There's a lie in our culture, and I bet you've heard it. I know I've heard it a lot. And the lie goes like this: if I'm not hurting anybody, if it's just me, if I'm just doing it in the privacy of my own home, I don't want anyone else to tell me what I should do with my life. It's fine. I'm not hurting anybody. Anybody ever hear that before? It's okay. I'm not hurting anybody. I'm just doing. Okay? We have lots of this. I just need a little of this to get me through the night. I just need a little help to get worked up before we get together. I just want to think about these things. I just want to chew on these things. I know that they say I have to do this, but I don't want to. And it's okay because I'm not hurting anybody. The reality is, your sin, it affects the people around you. And the closer they are to you, the greater the effect. Okay? These sailors, it wasn't their fault. They didn't run away from God. They didn't know who God was. They'd never heard of Yahweh. Okay? Obviously, they didn't take a lot of Jews to the other side of the known world. I don't know who this God is, but all right, if the guy's paying, it's good. Right? It's not their fault, and yet the whole boat is going to go down because one guy is on there, and he is on a downward spiral, and he is sinking so fast, he's taking the whole boat with him. The things that you do, the decisions that you make, they have consequences. And the closer people are to you, the stronger the consequences. Any RPG fans? Any RPG? Couple of video game guys, right? Okay? Just imagine area of effect spells, they affect you, and the closer you are to your buddies, the more protection they get. If any of you ever have that friend or that family member that they like perfume or cologne so much that it's like half a bottle, okay? And the closer, right, Elijah knows one of those. It's not him, though. It's one of your friends, okay? And the closer you are to cologne guy, the stronger the effect. Okay? Your sin affects the people around you. They're affected, first of all, write this down, by God's discipline. Because make no mistake, God disciplines those he loves. Now, not all pain in your life is because God is disciplining you. That's a broken piece of theology that sometimes we get. There's plenty of pain that comes into your life that has nothing to do with God's desire for you, but there are times, because he loves you, that if you turn down a path that's sending you on a downward spiral, God will bring pain as discipline into your life to try to get you to turn around before you go splat at the bottom. And that's something that he does because he loves you. Not because he just wants you to squirm, not because he wants to just exert his will. God does not need to exert his will over you. But he wants you to be healthy. So there are times when God brings discipline into your life. The problem is, if somebody else lives in your home, God's discipline is probably going to affect them too. And they didn't make that decision. You did. But God's discipline has a way of spilling over. Okay? If you want a good example, read about King David at the end of his life when he decided, I know that God has given me success over my enemies, but I think I'm a pretty awesome general. I want to count how many troops that I have so that I feel good about my army. Okay? And the whole nation gets punished because that guy made a bad decision. Sometimes God's discipline affects the people around you. Sometimes it's not God's discipline. Sometimes, write this down, the people around you are affected by the natural consequences of your actions. Because there's a difference, right? You realize there's a difference between God's discipline that he brings into your life, pain for a moment to try to get you to turn around, get on a healthier path. There's a difference between that and just the natural consequences of actions that happen. You can be forgiven for the guilt of your sin, but still have to face the natural consequences of your actions. Okay? If you spent the whole decade of your 20s stoned and drunk, you can be absolutely forgiven for falling into this pit of addiction, but your body may for the rest of your life carry some side effects from that style of living. If you choose to have an affair because that girl gives you more attention than your wife does, you may end up having to share custody of your kids and having to have awkward Christmases for the rest of your life. God didn't send that consequence to you. It's a natural outcome. If you choose to spend your time reflecting on how that person did you wrong and how they shouldn't have done it and how life is unfair to you, you turn that lens of your life dark and corroded and corrupted, and you walk through life as a bitter person. God didn't do that to you. You did. And if you are negative Nancy, bitter, because all of you guys know somebody, that no matter what happens, it's somehow bad and somehow bad news. Okay? Some of you guys, you live with Eeyore. And like the Eeyore spirit has just planted themselves on somebody. Okay? It affects the people around you. It drags the whole thing down. And some of you are saying, okay, I hear what you're saying, but look, what I'm doing, no one else even knows it's happening. Okay? And nobody else is not doing anything in my body. It's just me, and I just need a little unwind time with a couple apps on my phone. Nobody else knows. If nothing else, write this down. They're affected by the change in you. Because none of us are born with the character of God just sprouting from every open place in our, okay? We all, by nature, are corrupted by sin. The only way that we develop godly character is because we spend time with God. And if you choose a path, if you choose to walk away and say, I don't want God's help, I want to run away, I want to set my life in a downward spiral, then even if it's not costing your family money, and even if it's not bringing shame on your friends, and even if it's not corrupting your body, it's corrupting your soul, and you become a different person. And your brother no longer has the you that he needs. Now he has a lesser version of you. Your children who need a mom who's going to be a godly role model, all of a sudden they don't have the mom that they deserve. And they didn't do anything to earn that. It's the corruption that you allow into you. When you sin, it affects the people around you. Just like it did for Jonah. And I don't want the people around you to have a discount you. Now, that's kind of depressing. Am I right? Anybody else? It's like finishing every episode of This Is Us. As it turns out, everything you're doing is ruining your children. All right, let's see what's on the news. Right? That's depressing. Thankfully, that is not the end of his story, and this is not the end of our talk. Here's the good news. The good news is, just like we sang about earlier, we serve a God who is not content to watch us spiral into oblivion and eat popcorn and say, wow, what an idiot. Man, can you believe Mikey is, wow, it serves him right? That's not our God. Our God is the one who says, I have to do something to save them from themselves. And the good news is, write this down, the same influence that sinks the people around you can also lift them. Years ago, I heard a leadership talk, and somebody said, if you've been in a leadership position for more than 3 years, I have bad news and good news. The bad news is, whatever's wrong with your organization, it's your fault. Well, thanks. I paid you money to do that. And he said, the good news is, if it's your fault, you can fix it. So, okay, that's a little better. I want you to see what happens when Jonah takes responsibility. Okay, so verse 10. The sailors realize it's Jonah's fault. Why did you do it? They groaned. Since the storm was getting worse all the time, they asked him, what should we do to you to stop from this storm? Throw me into the sea, he says, and it will become calm again. And listen to what he says here. He says, I know that this terrible storm is all my fault. There's something important that happens in this moment. And I'll show you. He has not repented from his sin yet. But he realizes, wait a minute. My decisions, they're affecting all of you. It's not your fault. He's not mad at you. He's mad at me. He's not disciplining you. He's disciplining me. There's a powerful moment when you take responsibility for your actions and say, wow, I did not realize that what I was doing affected the people around me. He said, throw me in. It's my fault. Well, they were not quite ready to kill somebody. So verse 13, instead the sailors rowed even harder to get the ship to land. But the stormy sea was too violent for them and they couldn't make it. And they cried out to the Lord, Jonah's God. Oh Lord, they pleaded, don't make us die for this man's sin. Don't hold us responsible for his death. Lord, you have sent the storm upon him for your own good reasons. Then the sailors picked Jonah up, and they threw him into the raging sea, and the storm stopped at once. The sailors were awestruck by the Lord's great power, and they offered him a sacrifice, and they vowed to serve him. These guys had never even heard of God. And they're like, whoa, this Yahweh guy is like, throw the other idols over this. Okay, this is clearly the one real true God. Something that was a terrible thing. And a guy who was actively running away from God was still able to be used to point people toward God, even when he wasn't planning on that. There's something powerful that happens when you realize that your life is connected to the people around you, and you take responsibility for your actions, and you say, I don't want my selfish choices to pull everybody around me down. I have to do something different. I have to change. Now, if you're watching here, you're like, okay, so all I have to do is try really hard to be a better person, and instead of making everybody in the family, instead of dragging the whole thing down, I'll drag them up. Okay, I need to try harder. The problem is trying harder doesn't work because the inherent nature in you, the muscles that you flex, are inherently corrupted. And you don't get better by trying harder. You get better by reaching up to the hand that's been reached out to you that says, son, let me help you. Daughter, let me help you. The message of the gospel is not if you try really hard, you can become a good person and God will accept you. The message of the gospel is you were an idiot and God came to save you when you didn't deserve it. He's so good. Romans 6:4-7. For we died and were buried with Christ by baptism. And just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glorious power of the Father, now we also may live new lives. We're no longer slaves to sin. For when we died with Christ, we were set free from the power of sin. And as Natasha comes and we get ready to close, that's the thing that changes. That's the piece that changes. It's not that you say, oh, I'm dragging everyone down, I just need to leave the house. Pastor Chris said it's my fault. No. The people around you need you. Your life affects them because they love you and they need you. And if you disconnect yourself from them, that hurts them too. What they need is a God-redeemed version of you in that home. And you don't get that by trying harder. You get that by reaching up. Listen, each of us began life on a downward spiral because outside of God, none of us can be good enough to earn our way into heaven. None of us by default treat other people the right way. We need God's help. The last thing to write down is this: the way up isn't flexing harder, it's leaning on grace. It's coming to that moment where you say, I never considered that this is affecting the people that I love. I never thought about it. I thought it was just me, and I thought, well, if I screw myself up, it's just me. Oh, well, it's too bad for me. No, it's not just you. Your life, for better or for worse, it affects the people around you. And that power, that leverage that you have for evil can also be turned. And when God is in your life, when you reach up and you say, Lord, I can't fix this, but if you will help me, then together we can become a better person. Man, that changes you. Some of you, that's your story. There's some people in here that the truth is, because there was a time that you lived on your own and you know what a mess your life was in certain areas. And when you came to God and you came to a point of surrender and you said, Lord, I can't fix myself, you know that you're a different person because of grace. And what's beautiful is when you become healthier, you raise everyone around you. Dad, when you become a healthier person, you become a better dad to your kids. And everyone who lives under your roof benefits from a better you. Mom, if you are racked with guilt and shame, you may not realize it, but that bleeds over into the way that you parent your children. But if you come to understand grace and you forgive yourself and you allow God's view of you to change how you see yourself, when you love yourself, you're able to love others better. And your kids grow up better. Or your grown children grow up better. Or the people who work on your staff are healthier. When you reach up to grace, you become a totally different factor in the lives of the people around you. And that's what God wants. I say all the time, church is better with friends. This is an inherently social thing. And all of us wrestle with places in our lives where we know we should do this, but the gravity of life keeps pulling us to that. And it's important that you understand that your decisions, even the hidden ones, even the quiet ones, even the private ones, they affect the people around you. There's so much power for good. And before I wrap this up, I realize there will be those in the room, and maybe this is you on the screen. There will be those that say, I know, I get it, my family would be better off without me. Sometimes I think life would be better off without me. You're right. I'm a boat anchor for everyone. Maybe if I just die, everything else around me will be a better place. Okay? Let me tell you, as someone who spent years showing up on the scene in the middle of the night to talk to a family whose son just hung himself in the garage, to talk to a family whose daughter just swallowed the whole bottle of pills. Can I tell you, as someone who's walked through that initial shock moment with family after family after family, you could not be more wrong. Your family needs you. Don't give up on life, because the leverage, even if you are dragging people down, the leverage can be turned around to lift like none other. You have no idea what God can do to bless the people around you when you choose to turn around and say, God, I made a mess. I need help. Because we serve a God who, no matter what the mess is, he's been reaching out to you the whole time. And if we bring our mess to him, he is good and patient and kind and loving, and he will lift us up. And as we are pulled out of that downward spiral, not only do we get healthier, but our children get healthier, our siblings get healthier, our grown parents get healthier, the people who work next to us get healthier, the neighbor who keeps complaining about your dog, and why do they complain about your dog? They get healthier, right? Everybody rises. So don't fall for the lie that your choices are just about you. Take a sober look, and then reach up and say, Lord, help me to be someone who lifts the people that I love. Hey there, just wanted to take a minute to say thanks for watching. If a friend sent you this link, it's because they believe what we talked about today is going to make a positive impact in your life. And if it did, there's probably somebody that you care about who could benefit from it. So take a minute to share this video with somebody. Post it to your timeline or send them a direct link. And if you're able, take a minute to give using the link at the bottom of the description on this video. One last thing. Maybe you feel a tug at your soul and you're ready to take the next step in your spiritual life and form a relationship with God. We've got folks here who would love to talk with you about it. So just text prayer to the number on your screen and we'll follow up with you. It's also in the description on this video in case that helps. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.